All right, George. So I've heard you say before that now is probably the most critical time of year when it comes to managing the keeper's hive. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure, Dave. So right now it's the third week of March in northern Delaware. So the bees are definitely survived the winter, and now they're starting to build up as the tree pollen starts to come in, and the amount of brood starts to increase. So we all know that bees' primary instinct in the spring is to swarm. So we're all the keepers hive, the one queen and the two queen keepers hive run an 8 frame deep single brood chamber with a queen excluder above without any ability to sort of increase the size of the brood chamber larger than that. So the key is to be able to know when when the bees are starting to get that impulse to swarm, and to manage it so that they don't. And that's the art of using the keeper's hive in spring.
And so today we're going to go through a hive and talk about what to look for, right? To know when to do the first Demaree.
Yeah, so we're gonna be going into one of the one queen keepers hive, going into the 8 frame brood chamber, and taking a look at what's going on as far as how many bees are in the brood chamber, how much brood is in the brood chamber, how much nectar and pollen are they bringing in, and then with all that information, we'll make a determination of basically we could do one of three things. We could do nothing and say everything looks great and there's no crowding and no management necessary. Option number two would be, yeah, the brood chamber's getting a little full. Maybe we can do some brood sharing, which means taking a frame or two of brood out of that hive and putting it into another hive if needed. Or lastly, we could do the first Demaree manipulation on the hive to prevent it from swarming. So there's basically three management options that we're going to do, that we can do. Do nothing, brood share, or Demaree. And that really depends on what we see when we go in and inspect the brood chamber today, Dave.
If the brood chamber is getting full, why wouldn't you Demaree? Like, why would you brood share instead of the Demaree?
Yeah, you know what, the Demaree is basically a vertical split within the hive. So you're
Right.
taking the amount of brood that's in the brood chamber, and you're basically leaving 2 frames of brood below and moving 5 frames of brood above. So you're splitting the brood chamber. The risk of splitting the brood chamber early on in spring is chilled brood, both above and below. So you have to look at the forecast, and you also have to sort of know the strength of the hive before you do that. With brood sharing, you're not splitting the brood nest. You're basically just taking a frame or two of brood out of that brood chamber, giving it to another hive without actually splitting that brood chamber into two with the Demaree. And that's really important, is you don't want to split the brood nest too late because it will swarm. But if you split the brood nest too early, you run the risk of chilled brood. So it's just finding that sweet spot of when to do your first Demaree. And we'll go over some of the signs that you look for in order to figure out when that is. And some of it depends on your area where you're beekeeping. Down south, probably the third week of March is the perfect time to be doing the Demaree. Up in the Northeast, it's too early right now. So you just have to know your area and know the weather patterns, and really to inspect your bees to get a sense of what to do. Hey, Dave, we're here at hive number 7 at Winterthur, and we're going to try to answer a question of, is it time to do the first Demaree? So in order to decide if it's time to do the Demaree, you need to do a hive inspection. So let's open it up and see what's going on, Dave. So you can see there's a fair number of bees in this hive right now. They're covering pretty much all the frames in the brood chamber. And they got a lot of new wax going on, which is also a good sign that the nectar flow is going on. So when I'm thinking of whether or not it's going to be time to Demaree, I basically am looking for three things, Dave, in the inspection. One is that the brood chamber is full of bees. All frames are covered by bees. Secondly, there's at least 6 frames of brood in the brood chamber. So 6 of the frames are completely covered with brood. And lastly, they're starting to backfill the brood chamber a little bit with nectar. So they're running out of space to put their nectar. So let's take a look here. We're going to take off the frame protectors. Give this hive just a little bit of smoke. I gotta love these seated hive inspections, Dave.
You're spoiled.
It's really, I'm spoiled.
You spoiled yourself by
I
inventing this
spoiled
hive.
myself. What other hive can you do a seated hive inspection on? It's crazy, man. It's just crazy. Don't knock seated hive inspections until you try them, people. Once you go with a seated hive inspection, you'll wonder why you've done it any other way. So again, let's take a look, Dave. So this is frame number 2. And you can start to see on frame number 2, there's some larvae on frame number 2. Again, it's not completely covered with brood, but there's some open larvae. It's a pretty light frame, so not a lot of food or nectar on this frame, but looks pretty good. So let's put this in the quiet box, Dave. So let's look at frame number 1. This is the outside frame next to the follower board. And you're going to see that this frame is pretty light. It's got a little bit of nectar on it, so there's definitely more room for the bees to store their nectar on in this hive. So that frame is pretty light. So let's take a look at how many frames of brood we got there, Dave. So this is frame number 3. Frame number 3 is basically covered with brood. So you can see that there's a nice amount of brood on that frame. It's surrounded by some nice pollen. Again, a pretty healthy looking, without any signs of disease on any of the brood. So that's one frame of brood basically. We're going to look at the next frame, Dave. So again, a frame pretty much not completely covered with brood, but a fair amount of cap brood on that frame. A fair amount of cap brood on the other side. Again, it's a pretty light frame, so not a lot of nectar being stored in it, or they're not backfilling the brood nests at all, but a fair amount of and look at this frame. Again, a frame of basically cap brood that's emerging. Again, cap brood that's emerging. Very little drone brood in these things, and the queen is going back and laying on this frame. So again, no backfilling. So I think that's 1, 2, 3, 4 frames of brood. Let's take a look at one more, Dave, as we go along here. So there's 8 frames in the brood chamber. We can easily get to all 8 of the frames without removing the supers. So again, you can take a look at that. That's pretty much an open frame, Dave. So she open frame. So she's got more room to lay here. Is this ready to Demaree? Absolutely not. There's not 6 frames of brood in there. Are they backfilling the brood nest with nectar? No. And there probably still could be a little bit more crowded with bees in this hive. So I think right now the hive is doing really well, but I don't think it's ready to Demaree for sure.